The emergency klaxons screamed across the mining colony of New Busan, like banshees announcing the end of worlds. Captain Lee Dongwoo's weathered hands gripped the evacuation manifest as red warning lights bathed the command center in hellish crimson. 17 worlds, 17 civilizations reduced to ash and bone by a single creature whose name had become synonymous with inevitable death. Vexthor was coming. "Sir, the last transport is prepped and ready," reported Lieutenant Nam Kaite, his voice barely steady despite years of military training. "All personnel accounted for except—" He hesitated, consulting his datapad with trembling fingers. "Except who, Lieutenant?" Dongwoo's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Park Ji-ho, sir. Mining engineer section 7. He's refusing." Evacuation. Dongwoo felt his blood turn to ice water. In the outer rim colonies, everyone knew the stories. Vexthor didn't simply kill, he made art from suffering. The 12-foot-tall nightmare from the Kethvar homeworld had perfected torture into a science, breaking minds before bodies, leaving his victims begging for death long before he granted it. Entire planets had surrendered rather than face him. And those that hadn't, well, the scattered debris fields told their own story. "Get me a comm line to Park Ji-ho. Now." The connection crackled to life, filled with the rhythmic pounding of industrial machinery. Through the static came a voice that sounded like gravel mixed with exhaustion. "This is Ji-ho. Park, this is Captain Lee. You need to get to the transport bay immediately. We have maybe 20 minutes before—" "I know who's coming, Captain." The voice was eerily calm, almost peaceful. "I'm not leaving." Dongwoo exchanged glances with his officers. In 30 years of service, he'd seen fear take many forms, but this wasn't fear. This was something else entirely. "Ji-ho, listen to me carefully. Vexthor has destroyed 17 worlds. He doesn't take prisoners. He doesn't show mercy. What he does to people, no one deserves that fate." A dry chuckle echoed through the, "No one deserves a lot of things, Captain. Doesn't stop them from happening. Damn it, Park, I'm not leaving a man behind. I'm coming to get you. Don't." The single word carried such finality that it stopped Dongwoo cold. "Captain, you've got 300 souls on that transport who deserve to live. Don't waste time on someone who doesn't want to be saved." The line went dead. Dongwoo stared at the silent communicator, his mind racing. He'd read Ji-ho's file during the evacuation prep. Mining engineer, age 34. Exemplary work record. Wife and daughter killed in a raider attack on Kepler 186F 3 years ago. Survivor's guilt, depression, multiple psychological evaluations. The man had been living on borrowed time, haunted by ghosts and survivor's guilt. "Sir, we need to go," Kite urged, his eyes fixed on the tactical display showing a massive ship entering the system's outer edge. Long-range sensors confirm it's the Dread Sovereign, Vexthor's flagship. Through the viewport, space itself seemed to recoil from the approaching vessel. The Dread Sovereign wasn't just a ship, it was a monument to fear, its hull adorned with the skulls of 1,000 species, its weapon arrays capable of glassing continents. But it was the ship's passenger that truly terrified the galaxy. Stories of Vexthor had spread across civilized space like a plague. Some said he was born from the nightmares of dying gods. Others claimed he was evolution's cruelest joke, a creature designed solely to inflict suffering. The Kethvar warrior stood 12 feet tall, his obsidian exoskeleton gleaming like polished death, razor-sharp claws capable of rending steel, and eyes that burned with an intelligence that made his cruelty all the more terrifying. He had conquered worlds not through superior firepower or overwhelming numbers, but through fear itself. Entire systems surrendered at the mere mention of his name. Those that didn't, well, the recordings that survived told stories of torments that defied imagination. "Captain, please!" Kite's voice cracked with desperation. Dongwoo took one last look at the mining facility sprawling across the asteroid's surface. Somewhere in those industrial corridors, a broken man sat waiting for death to find him. With a heavy heart, he turned away from the viewport. "All stations prepare for immediate departure. Maximum burn to the hyperspace jump point." As the transport's engines roared to life, Dongwoo found himself praying to whatever gods might listen for the soul of Park Ji-ho. The man deserved better than what was coming. Deep within Mining Section 7, Park Ji-ho sat in his cramped quarters, methodically cleaning his coffee maker. The ritual had become sacred to him over the past 3 years, a small anchor of normalcy in an ocean of grief. Around him, the walls displayed holographic images of his lost family. So-young's radiant smile as she held baby Hee-jin, his daughter's first steps, birthday parties that felt like memories from another lifetime. The facility's emergency lighting cast everything in shades of red, but Ji-ho felt only a strange sense of peace. For 3 years, he'd carried the weight of survival, like a millstone around his neck. Every morning brought fresh guilt. Why had he lived when they had died? What cosmic joke had spared him while claiming the 2 people who made existence worthwhile? The therapist had tried to help. Medication, counseling, support groups filled with other hollow-eyed survivors. Nothing worked. The universe had taken everything that mattered and left him with the cruelest punishment of all, continued existence. But today felt different. Today the choice would finally be taken from him. Through the facility's massive windows, he could see the dread sovereign approaching like a cancer spreading across the stars. Its weapon ports glowed with malevolent energy, and its hull seemed to absorb light itself. Soon, Vexthor would stride through these corridors, bringing with him all the suffering the galaxy whispered about in terrified voices. Ji-ho finished cleaning his coffee maker and began preparing what would likely be his last cup. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent 3 years searching for the courage to end his own pain, and now death was coming to find him instead. As the bitter aroma filled his quarters, he found himself wondering what Vexthor would think of, a human who greeted death like an old friend. Would the legendary warrior be puzzled by prey that didn't run? Would his carefully crafted torments lose their edge against someone who had already experienced the worst pain imaginable? The dread sovereign's shadow fell across the mining facility like a funeral shroud. Soon, the galaxy's most feared predator would discover something he had never encountered before, a human with absolutely nothing left to lose. Ji-ho raised his coffee cup in a mock toast to the approaching ship. "Come on then," he whispered to the darkness. "Let's see which one of us is really the monster." The dread sovereign's landing thrusters scorched the asteroid's surface as it settled onto the mining facility's main docking platform, with predatory grace. Steam hissed from its hull like the breath of some mechanical dragon, and the facility's emergency lighting flickered as the ship's massive bulk blocked out the stars. Silence fell across New Busan like a burial shroud. From the ship's belly, a boarding ramp descended with the slow deliberation of an executioner's axe. The metal groaned under the weight of what emerged. Vexthor stepped into the red-tinged darkness, and the very air seemed to recoil from his presence. 12 feet of nightmare made manifest, his obsidian exoskeleton caught the emergency lights and scattered them like broken promises. Each of his forearms ended in claws that could shred plasteel, and his elongated skull housed a mind that had turned suffering into high art. Twin rows of razor teeth gleamed behind a mouth that had never known mercy, but it was his eyes that truly marked him as something beyond natural evolution. They burned with an intelligence both ancient and utterly alien, holding depths of malice that had driven lesser beings mad with a single glance. Those eyes had watched 17 worlds burn, had studied the precise moment when hope died in a billion souls. He inhaled deeply through gill-like slits along his neck, tasting the air for the scent of fear. It was his drug, his sustenance, the sweet perfume that made existence worthwhile. But something was wrong. The facility reeked of abandonment and recycled atmosphere, but fear. Where was the delicious terror that should be saturating every molecule? His claws clicked against the deck plating as he moved deeper into the facility, each step measured and deliberate. Motion sensors tracked his progress, broadcasting his location to empty monitoring stations. Emergency bulkheads sealed, themselves in his wake, a futile gesture that amused him. No barrier had ever kept him from his prey. The facility's layout unfolded in his mind like a tactical display. Mining operations stretched across 17 levels, with residential quarters clustered around the core. Somewhere in this metal labyrinth, his victims waited. They always waited. frozen like small animals before a predator, their terror paralyzing them more effectively than any cage. Level 7. The motion detectors had registered a single heat signature in the mining engineers' quarters, one last morsel left behind by the evacuation. Vexithor's four lips pulled back in what might charitably be called a smile. The best prey were always the ones who thought they could hide. He found the quarters easily enough, a cramped box of metal and recycled air that reeked of human habitation. The door stood open, spilling warm light into the corridor like an invitation. Through the doorway, he could see a figure seated at a small table, back turned to the entrance. Vexthor paused. In 3 centuries of conquest, prey had never presented themselves so casually. Where was the cowering? The desperate attempts at barricading? The pleading for mercy that would never come? He ducked through the doorway, his massive frame filling the small space. The human didn't turn around. "You're taller than the story suggested," Park Jiho said conversationally, not looking up from his steaming coffee cup. "Though I suppose fear has a way of distorting perspective." Vexthor blinked, an unsettling sight as his inner and outer eyelids moved independently. This wasn't the reaction he'd cultivated across 17 worlds. Humans were supposed to soil themselves and beg. They were supposed to break immediately upon seeing him. "You know who I am?" It wasn't a question. His voice emerged as a harmonious blend of grinding metal and distant thunder, each word carefully modulated to inspire maximum dread. "Vexthor the Worldbreaker, Nightmare of the Outer Rim, the Kethvar's perfect weapon." Jiho finally turned around, and his eyes held no trace of the fear that Vexthor had come to expect. Instead, there was something the alien warrior had rarely encountered: genuine curiosity. "Coffee?" The question hung in the air like a verbal slap. Vexthor's head tilted at an unnatural angle, studying this strange creature who offered refreshments to death incarnate. "You mock me." "Not at all." Jiho rose from his chair with the unhurried movements of someone who had already accepted whatever came next. "I made extra figuring you might be thirsty after the trip. Your homeworld is, 47 light years from here? That's a long way to travel for one mining colony." Vexthor's claws extended involuntarily, a reflexive response to prey that refused to act like prey. "I will flay the skin from your bones. I will keep you alive as I feed your organs to the void. Your screams will echo through this facility until the metal itself weeps." Jiho nodded thoughtfully, as if considering a weather report. "That sounds unpleasant. Is that what you did to the Altarians?" "I read the reports. Creative work, though I imagine the cleanup was a nightmare." The casual tone sent ripples of confusion through Vexthor's predatory instincts. Where was the breaking point? Every species had one, that precise moment when the mind snapped under the weight of inevitable suffering. He'd mapped the psychological architecture of dozens of civilizations, knew exactly how to find the cracks in their sanity. "You will beg before the end," Vexthor snarled, leaning forward until his skull nearly touched the ceiling. "They all beg." "Maybe." Jiho settled back into his chair and gestured to the holographic displays lining his walls. "These are my wife and daughter, So Young and Hye Jin. Raiders killed them 3 years ago on Kepler 186F. You remind me of those raiders, actually. Same approach, lots of threats, lots of posturing. They seemed disappointed when I didn't react the way they expected either." Vexthor studied the images with the clinical interest of a predator learning about its prey's attachments. Dead family members were excellent leverage for psychological torture. The grief could be weaponized, turned into exquisite agony. "I will desecrate their memory. I will make you watch as You'll what? Kill them again?" Jiho's laugh held. No humor, only a hollow echo of old pain. "They're already gone. You can't threaten someone with loss when they've already lost everything that mattered." For the first time in his long existence, Vexthor felt something that might have been uncertainty. His psychological arsenal, refined across centuries of conquest, seemed to slide off this human like water off stone. Where was the leverage? The attachment to life that made torture meaningful? He tried a different approach, extending one razor-tipped claw until it hovered inches from Jiho's throat. Your colonies, New Sol, Haven Base. I will visit them next. I will make them pay for your defiance. Jiho considered this, sipping his coffee with maddening calm. You probably will. Lots of innocent people will suffer because of your hobby. That's unfortunate, but it's not really my problem anymore. Not your problem. The words emerged as a hiss of disbelief. I used to care about things like that. Protecting people, doing the right thing, making a difference. Jiho's eyes grew distant, focused on something Vexthor couldn't see. But caring requires investment, and I've got nothing left to invest. Hard to threaten someone who genuinely doesn't care what happens next. Vexthor straightened to his full height, his forearms spreading wide in an intimidation display that had cowed entire armies. Emergency lighting gleamed off his obsidian carapace as he loomed over the seated human, like a monument to death. Jiho looked up at him with the same mild interest he might reserve for an unusual cloud formation. Are you trying to frighten me? Because if so, you might want to recalibrate your approach. I've been afraid every day for 3 years. Afraid of living, afraid of remembering, afraid of forgetting. After a while, you run out of fear. It's like any other emotion. Use it up, and there's nothing left. The alien warrior felt something crack in his perfect predatory worldview. For 300 years, fear had been his constant companion, his tool, his purpose. What did you do with prey that refused to be afraid? You lie. But even as he said it, Vexthor could taste the truth in the human's scent. No adrenaline spike, no pheromone markers of terror, just acceptance. Jiho smiled for the first time since the conversation began, and it was a terrible thing to see, not cruel or mocking, but infinitely sad. I wish I was lying. It would make this easier for both of us. In the silence that followed, Vexthor experienced something he had never felt before, the uncomfortable sensation of meeting someone who was already broken in ways that his expertise couldn't touch. 3 days had passed since Vexthor's arrival, and the mining facility had settled into an eerie routine that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about the Worldbreaker. The creature who had reduced 17 civilizations to ash now found himself doing something unprecedented, waiting. He sat in the facility's main cafeteria, his massive frame dwarfing the human-sized furniture, watching Park Jiho methodically prepare breakfast with the same unhurried precision he applied to everything else. The human had insisted on maintaining normal routines, eating at regular intervals, checking system diagnostics, even tending to the hydroponic gardens that fed the facility's life support systems. You could simply kill me, Jiho observed, cracking eggs into a pan with practiced efficiency. I'm not sure why you haven't. Vexthor's inner eyelids blinked slowly, a sign of deep thought among his species. The question had been gnawing at him for 72 hours. By all rights, this human should have been dead within minutes of their first encounter. Instead, he found himself curious. It was a foreign sensation, as alien to his nature as compassion or mercy. Your species fascinates me, he admitted, his harmonious voice echoing off the cafeteria's metal walls. I have studied the psychological profiles of 47 different civilizations. All possessed predictable breaking points. All followed established patterns of fear response. You. He gestured with one clawed hand. You are an anomaly. Jiho flipped the eggs with a deft twist of his wrist. Not really. Just broken differently than most. He glanced at Vexthor with those unnervingly calm eyes. What about your people? What breaks a Kethvar? The question caught Vexthor off guard. In 3 centuries of existence, no prey had ever asked about his own vulnerabilities. They were too busy begging or screaming to show genuine curiosity about their predator. We do not break, he replied automatically, then paused. The words felt hollow even as he spoke them. We are bred for conquest. Weakness is eliminated early. Everyone breaks eventually. Jiho divided the eggs between 2 plates, adding a portion of synthesized protein that bore a passing resemblance to bacon. The question is whether you break into sharp pieces that cut others or worn smooth pieces that just exist. He slid one of the plates across the table. "Which kind are you?" Vexthor stared at the offered meal. Food was sustenance. Nothing more. He had never shared a meal with prey before. The entire concept violated the fundamental nature of the predator-prey relationship. Yet something about the gesture, the simple act of being offered nourishment rather than being treated as a source of terror, stirred unfamiliar sensations in his consciousness. His feeding apparatus, a complex arrangement of mandibles and serrated teeth, was designed for tearing flesh, not delicate manipulation of prepared food. But he found himself attempting to consume the eggs with something approaching delicacy, acutely aware of Jiho's watching eyes. "Tell me about your daughter," Vexthor said suddenly, surprising himself with the request. Jiho's expression softened, and for a moment the carefully maintained emotional distance flickered. "Haye Jin, she would have been 8 this year." I pulled up a holographic display from his personal device. The image showed a small girl with bright eyes and a gap-toothed grin, her arms wrapped around a stuffed animal that resembled some earth creature Vexthor couldn't identify. She wanted to be an engineer like her father. Used to follow me around the workshops asking questions about everything. "Why does this do that? How does this work? Can we build one that flies?" Jiho's voice carried a warmth that seemed to fill the sterile cafeteria. So Young said she inherited my curiosity and her mother's stubbornness. Dangerous combination. Vexthor found himself studying the image with unexpected intensity. He had seen countless family portraits during his conquests, usually just before destroying them to maximize psychological impact. But this was different. This wasn't reconnaissance, this was sharing. "My people do not form such attachments," he said carefully. "Young Kethvar are raised communally. Individual bonds are seen as weakness." Sounds lonely. The simple observation hit Vexthor like a physical blow. Lonely. It wasn't a concept that had ever applied to him. He was the world breaker, the nightmare of the Outer Rim. He was feared across 17 systems. How could someone so powerful be lonely? But as he sat in the quiet cafeteria, sharing breakfast with a man who had every reason to hate him, Vexthor realized that fear and respect were poor substitutes for genuine connection. When had he last had a conversation that wasn't about conquest or intimidation? When had anyone ever asked about his thoughts, his feelings, his experiences? "The raiders who killed your family," Vexthor said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Did you ever find them?" Jiho nodded, his expression growing distant. "Some of them. The Colonial Defense Force tracked down their base about a year later. Wanted me to testify at their tribunal, help put them away for life." He paused, stirring, his coffee with mechanical precision. "I couldn't bring myself to care enough to attend. They were already caught. So Young and Hyojin were still dead. What difference did it make?" "You felt no desire for revenge?" "Oh, I did. For months, I fantasized about finding them myself, making them suffer the way they made my family suffer." Jiho met Vexthor's burning gaze without flinching. "But revenge requires passion, and passion requires hope. Once you accept that nothing you do will bring back what you've lost, revenge becomes just another meaningless gesture." Vexthor processed this, his forearms moving restlessly. Revenge was the foundation of Kethvar culture. Honor through conquest, strength through domination, meaning through the subjugation of others. Yet this human spoke of abandoning revenge as if it were a burden rather than a purpose. "What gives your existence meaning now?" he asked. Jiho was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the same methodical attention he gave to his engineering problems. "I suppose routine, maintenance, keeping systems running even when no one's around to benefit from them." He gestured at the cafeteria around them. "This facility could support 300 people. Right now it's just us. But the air recyclers still run, the gravity generators still function, the lights still turn on. There's something comforting about that persistence. You maintain systems for no one. I maintain them because that's what they're for. A thing should do what it was designed to do, regardless of whether anyone notices." Jiho smiled that sad, terrible smile again. Maybe. That's what I am now. A maintenance system for my own existence. Not particularly meaningful, but functional. The conversation was interrupted by the facility's communication array crackling to life. A familiar voice echoed through the speakers. Captain Lee Dong-woo, broadcasting from somewhere beyond, the system's edge. Park Ji-ho, if you're receiving this transmission, please respond. We have Galactic Defense Force ships standing by. Whatever's happening there, you don't have to face it alone. Ji-ho and Vex-Thor looked at each other across the cafeteria table. The moment stretched between them, pregnant with implications neither had expected when this strange dance began. You could signal them, Vex-Thor observed. Tell them I'm no longer a threat. Are you? No longer a threat, I mean. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Vex-Thor examined his own motivations, probing the changes that had occurred over the past 3 days. The hunger for fear that had driven him for centuries felt muted, distant. In its place was something else. A curiosity about this broken human who shared breakfast with monsters and asked questions no one had ever thought to ask. I don't know, he admitted, and the honesty in his voice surprised them both. Ji-ho nodded as if this answer made perfect sense. He walked to the communication console and activated the transmitter. Captain Lee, this is Ji-ho. Thanks for checking in, but I'm handling things here. Tell the Defense Force to stand down. Whatever threat you thought was coming to New Busan, it's been neutralized. Ji-ho, we're reading the Dread Sovereign still on your landing pad. Vex-Thor is no longer your concern. Trust me on this one, Captain. Sometimes the most dangerous situations resolve themselves in unexpected ways. After a brief pause, Dong-woo's voice returned, heavy with reluctance. Understood. But if you need anything at all, you know how to reach us. The transmission ended, leaving the facility. In silence once more, Vex-Thor studied the human who had just convinced a military captain to call off a rescue operation for the sake of a creature who had terrorized the galaxy. Why? He asked simply. Ji-ho returned to his seat, picking up his coffee cup with hands that remained perfectly steady. Because I think we're both trying to figure out what comes after the ending, and maybe we're better at it together than apart. For the first time in 3 centuries, Vex-Thor felt something that might have been gratitude. The tranquility that had settled over New Busan shattered like crystal against steel when the Kethvar battle fleet emerged from hyperspace. 12 warships materialized in perfect formation, their hulls bristling with enough firepower to reduce the mining facility to its component atoms. At their head was the Bone Crusher, a vessel that had earned its name through the systematic destruction of entire civilizations. Park Ji-ho watched the tactical display with the same calm acceptance he'd shown when facing Vex-Thor alone. Friends, of yours? He asked, glancing at the alien warrior who stood frozen beside him in the command center. Vex-Thor's 4 hands clenched into fists, his claws extending involuntarily. The sight of those familiar ships brought with it a flood of memories. Conquest, glory, the intoxicating rush of watching worlds burn. But overlaying those recollections was something new. A hollow feeling in his chest cavity, where his primary heart beat with sudden urgency. My people, he said, his harmonic voice carrying undertones of something that might have been dread. They've come to retrieve me. The communication array crackled to life, filled with the guttural tones of the Kethvar language. When translated through the facility's systems, the words carried the weight of absolute authority. Vex-Thor, respond immediately. Your absence has been noted. Your behavior has been questioned. Ji-ho studied his unlikely companion's reaction to the transmission. Over the past week, he'd watched the galaxy's most feared predator slowly transform into something resembling a person rather than a living weapon. The change had been subtle. Moments of genuine curiosity, questions about human customs, even what might charitably be called humor. Now faced with his own kind, Vex-Thor seemed to shrink back into the shell of the creature he'd once been. You don't have to answer, Ji-ho said quietly. Yes, I do. Vexthor activated the transmitter, his voice reverting to the cold, measured tones of a military report. This is Vexthor. I am conducting extended reconnaissance of human psychological profiles. The response came immediately, laden with suspicion. Reconnaissance that requires 7 standard days? Commander Graknal requests immediate conference. Prepare for boarding. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in oppressive silence. Vexthor turned to face Jiho, and the human was surprised to see something that looked almost like panic in those burning eyes. Graknal was my second in command during the conquest of the Meridian colonies. Vexthor explained, his voice barely above a whisper. He is ambitious, and he has never approved of what he sees as my excessive interest in understanding prey psychology. Meaning he believes I have become weak, and among the Kethvar, weakness is eliminated swiftly and without ceremony. Jiho nodded thoughtfully, as if considering a routine maintenance problem rather than an impending execution. So we're back to the original plan then. You kill me, prove your loyalty, everyone's happy. No, the word emerged with such vehemence that both of them were startled by it. Vexthor's mandibles clicked in agitation as he processed his own reaction. I will not kill you. Even if it means your own death? Especially then. Vexthor's forearms spread wide in a gesture of resignation. I have spent 3 centuries taking life. Perhaps it is time to preserve one, even at the cost of my own. Before Jiho could respond, the facility's hull shuddered under the impact of a Kethvar boarding pod. Emergency alarms shrieked as the alien craft burned through the outer hull, bringing with it the acrid smell of superheated metal and something else. The distinctive pheromone signature of Kethvar warriors in full battle readiness. Showtime, Jiho muttered, checking the charge on a plasma cutter he'd retrieved from the engineering bay. The tool wasn't designed as a weapon, but it would have to suffice. What are you doing? Vexthor demanded, seeing the human arm himself. What? I should have done 3 years ago, Jiho replied, his voice carrying a strength that hadn't been there since his family's death. Fighting for something that matters. The boarding party consisted of 6 Kethvar warriors, led by Commander Graknal, a creature who made even Vexthor look restrained. Where Vexthor's obsidian carapace held a certain terrible beauty, Graknal's was scarred and pitted from countless battles. His 4 arms bore trophies from defeated enemies, finger bones, teeth, strips of alien hide that had been woven into decorative patterns, brother. Graknal's voice carried the false warmth of a predator greeting wounded prey. You look changed. As do you, Vexthor replied carefully. Command suits you. Graknal's burning gaze shifted to Jiho, who stood beside his unlikely protector with the plasma cutter held in a grip that suggested familiarity with violence. And this is your research subject? How thorough has your study been? The mockery in his tone was unmistakable. Vexthor felt his primary heart accelerate, pumping combat stimulants through his system. Thorough enough? Excellent. Then you will have no difficulty demonstrating your findings. Graknal gestured to his warriors, who formed a loose circle around the 2 unlikely allies. Kill the human, slowly. Show us what you have learned of their breaking points. The moment stretched between them like a blade's edge. Vexthor looked at Jiho, who met his gaze with the same calm acceptance that had first confused and then transformed the alien warrior. In those dark eyes, Vexthor saw something he had never expected to find. Trust. No, Vexthor said simply. The word fell into the sudden silence like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled warriors. Graknal's head tilted at an unnatural angle, his mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement. No, he repeated, as if testing an unfamiliar concept. I will not kill Park Jiho. Vexthor stepped forward, placing his massive frame between the boarding party and the human engineer. Nor will I allow you to harm him. You would protect prey? Graknal's voice carried the incredulous tone of someone witnessing a fundamental violation of natural law. I would protect a friend. The admission hung in the air like a confession of heresy. Among the Kethvar, Friendship was a weakness to be purged, attachment a flaw to be eliminated. To claim kinship with prey was to abandon everything their civilization held sacred. Gracnal's laughter emerged as a sound like grinding metal. You have become corrupted, brother, infected by human sentiment. He extended his claws, their edges gleaming with neural toxins. But corruption can be cleansed. I challenge you for command of this fleet. The ritual challenge was as old as Kethvar civilization itself. Combat to the death, winner taking all. But this time, Vexthor wouldn't be fighting for conquest or glory. He would be fighting for something infinitely more precious, the right to choose his own path. I accept, Vexthor said, his voice carrying the weight of finality. Behind him, Jiho gripped his plasma cutter tighter and whispered something. That might have been a prayer. For the first time in 3 years, he had found something worth fighting for. Someone worth saving. And he'd be damned if he was going to lose it to a galaxy that measured worth only in terms of fear and domination. The circle of warriors expanded, giving the combatants room to maneuver. Gracnal moved with the fluid grace of a born killer, his 4 arms weaving patterns in the air as he stalked his former commander. Vexthor matched his movements, but there was something different in his stance, a protective quality that spoke of defending rather than destroying. You fight for weakness, Gracnal hissed, lunging forward with claws extended. I fight for choice, Vexthor replied, meeting the attack with a grace born of centuries of combat experience. The battle that followed would be remembered in both Kethvar and human histories as the moment when the galaxy's most feared predator discovered what it truly meant to have something worth protecting. And in the shadows of that desperate fight, a broken human engineer found the strength to stand against the darkness one more time. For both of them, the ending of their old stories had finally given way to the beginning of something entirely new. The duel between Vexthor and Gracnal erupted with the savage fury of primordial forces colliding. In the cramped confines of the mining facility's command center, their battle took on an almost ritualistic quality. 2 titans of destruction locked in combat that would determine not just their fate, but the future of everything they represented. Gracnal fought with the cold efficiency of traditional Kethvar warfare, each strike calculated to inflict maximum damage while preserving his own combat effectiveness. His neural toxin-coated claws whistled through the air in patterns perfected over millennia of conquest, seeking the gaps in Vexthor's obsidian armor. But Vexthor fought differently now. Where once he had relied purely on overwhelming aggression, he now moved with purpose beyond mere victory. Every parry, every counterattack was designed not just to defeat his opponent, but to protect the human standing behind him. It was a style of combat no Kethvar had ever developed, born from an emotion their species had never acknowledged: love. Park Jiho watched the battle with the analytical mind of an engineer, noting the subtle differences between the 2 fighters. Gracnal was faster, more vicious, unconstrained by anything resembling compassion. But Vexthor had something his challenger lacked, a reason to fight that transcended personal glory. The tide turned when Gracnal, frustrated by his opponent's defensive tactics, attempted a killing strike that would have torn through both combatants to reach Jiho. Vexthor intercepted the blow with his own body, 4 razor-sharp claws punching through his carapace just below his primary heart. Dark ichor sprayed across the command center's walls as he roared in pain. But instead of falling, Vexthor used the moment of contact to grab Gracnal's extended arm and twist with all his remaining strength. The sickening crack of chitinous armor breaking echoed through the facility as the challenger's limb bent at an impossible angle. You fight like prey, Gracnal snarled, ichor flowing from his own wounds. Weak, desperate. I fight like someone who has found something worth preserving, Vexthor replied, his harmonic voice strained but determined. The final exchange lasted only seconds. Gracnal, driven by rage and pain, abandoned all technique in favor of a berserker's charge. Vexthor, his vision blurring from blood loss, met him head-on. When the dust settled, only 1 warrior remained standing. Vexthor swayed on his feet, Grachnal's primary heart clutched in one bloody claw. The traditional trophy of Kethvar victory dripped dark fluid onto the deck plating as he faced the remaining boarding party. 5 warriors, their loyalty now legally transferred to him by right of combat. "Your orders, Commander?" one of them asked, the title carrying weight beyond mere military hierarchy. Vexthor looked at the heart in his hand, then at Park Ji-ho, who was applying emergency medical foam to his wounds with the calm efficiency of someone accustomed to industrial accidents. The human's touch was gentle, caring, sensations no Kethvar had ever experienced. "Return to the fleet," Vexthor commanded, his voice growing weaker. Tell them I choose exile." The warriors exchanged glances of confusion and disgust. Voluntary exile was perhaps the most alien concept in their vocabulary. To abandon conquest glory, the very purpose of Kethvar existence, was incomprehensible. "Commander, the human has clearly infected your mind with some form of— The human has shown me what it means to be more than a weapon," Vexthor interrupted, sinking to one knee as his strength failed. "Go. That is my final command as your superior." After the boarding party retreated, taking Grachnal's body with them, the facility fell into blessed silence. Ji-ho worked methodically to seal Vexthor's wounds, his engineering background providing unexpected medical insight. The alien's ichor had a different coagulation pattern than human blood, but the principles remained the same. "You could have killed me and avoided all this," Ji-ho observed, threading surgical wire through a particularly deep gash. "Yes," Vexthor agreed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you?" Vexthor was quiet for a long moment, his burning eyes focused on something beyond the facility's walls. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of revelation. "Because for the first time in 3 centuries, I met someone who saw me as more than a monster. You never feared me, Ji-ho. You saw possibility." Through the command center's viewport, they watched the Kethvar fleet begin its departure. The massive ships turned in space like predators abandoning insufficient prey, their weapon ports powering down as they prepared for hyperspace transit. The dread sovereign would remain, but its master was no longer the creature who had arrived a week ago. "What will you do now?" Ji-ho asked, applying the last of the medical foam to Vexthor's wounds. "I don't know," the alien admitted. "I have no experience with choosing. For my entire existence, my purpose was determined by others. Conquest, fear, domination. These were not choices but programmed responses." Ji-ho nodded, understanding the weight of that admission. Choice is terrifying, especially when you've never had to make real ones before. He helped Vexthor to his feet, surprised by how natural the gesture felt. "Maybe that's something we can figure out together." The communication array crackled to life once more, but this time the voice was human. Captain Lee Dongwoo's concerned tones filled the command center. "New Busan facility. This is the GDF cruiser Harmony. We're detecting massive energy signatures in your vicinity. What's your status?" Ji-ho looked at Vexthor, who nodded slowly. Together, they approached the transmitter. "Captain Lee, this is Ji-ho. The situation has evolved. I'm requesting asylum for a defector, and I think it's time I came home." "Defector? Ji-ho, what the hell happened out there?" "Something that shouldn't have been possible," Ji-ho replied, placing a gentle hand on Vexthor's armored shoulder. "I found a reason to keep living, and I think I helped someone else find their humanity." The rescue operation that followed would become the stuff of legends throughout human space. The sight of Vexthor, the world-breaker, the nightmare of the Outer Rim, walking peacefully beside Park Ji-ho onto a human vessel, challenged every assumption the galaxy held about the nature of evil and redemption. Commander Choi Min-ho of the A. Colonial Defense Force stood on the bridge of the Harmony, watching through the viewport as the most feared creature in known space submitted to medical examination with the patience of someone who had finally found peace. Beside him, Captain Lee shook his head in amazement. "I've read the reports 3 times, Lee said. "I still don't understand how this happened." "Maybe that's the point," Choi replied thoughtfully. Maybe understanding isn't always necessary. Sometimes witnessing is enough. In the medical bay, Vexthor endured the curious stares of human medical personnel with newfound grace. Their fear was palpable, but it no longer fed him. Instead, he found himself oddly protective of their safety, intervening when one young medic's trembling hands nearly caused injury. Carefully, he advised gently, his harmonic voice modulated to minimize its intimidating effect. The scanner requires steady pressure to function properly. Dr. Kim Yuna, the ship's chief medical officer, watched this interaction with professional fascination. In 30 years of medicine, she had treated hundreds of species, but never had she seen such a fundamental transformation in a patient's behavioral patterns. "How do you feel?" she asked Vexthor directly, her initial fear giving way to scientific curiosity. The alien considered the question with the same methodical attention Jiho had taught him to apply to complex problems. "Different," he said finally, "as if I have been carrying a weight I did not realize existed, and only now understand its absence." 3 months later, the galaxy watched in stunned silence as Park Jiho stood before the Galactic Council to present his proposal for the Interspecies Rehabilitation Protocol. Beside him sat Vexthor, no longer the world breaker but something unprecedented, a reformed weapon choosing to become a protector. "Members of the Council," Jiho began, his voice carrying strength that had been absent for years. "I stand before you today as proof that transformation is possible, even in the darkest circumstances. The being beside me was once the galaxy's greatest threat. Today he serves as evidence that our capacity for change, all of our capacities for change, may be greater than we ever imagined." The protocol that emerged from those hearings would revolutionize how the galaxy approached conflict resolution. But for two unlikely friends, the real victory was far simpler. They had found in each other proof that even the most broken things could be made whole again, and that sometimes the end of one story was simply the beginning of another. In the quiet moments between diplomatic missions, when the weight of their newfound purpose pressed too heavily, Jiho and Vexthor would sit together in comfortable silence, two souls who had pulled each other back from the brink of absolute darkness. They had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but about choosing what the future could become. And in that choice, they had discovered something the galaxy had never seen before: a friendship strong enough to transform monsters into guardians and despair into hope.